My name is Brooke Grayson, and I am the proud president of our Waco City Moore Park Association of Realtors. And I'm honored to be here as our moderator this morning for Fair Housing Panel. This is a near and dear to my heart topic, and I look forward to introducing you to Bill Dedman in a few moments, who is our keynote speaker today, as well as the panelists who will be coming in around 10:30, 10:45 to share their insights around the challenges that different demographics in our community face with housing and real estate issues. So I have a lovely script here. I'm going to rely on this a little bit. Before I get started, I want to just acknowledge what we all probably recognize the moment we walked in the door, that we see a lot of the same people at this Fair Housing Symposium year after year, and it's a little bit of preaching to the choir. And I love that you're here. I love that we all share that same heart, that same passion for fair housing and eliminating discrimination in our profession. And as the president this year, what I intend to do, since we have an amazing audio-visual recording going on right now, thank you, Christine, and your husband, Will Mason. Thank you so much for doing this today. What we'd like to do is, as we're recording this and we have the final edited version, we'll be cutting this up into little filmed shorts and continue to share this on our social media and in our weekly scoops to make sure that the message gets out where it needs to be, to the agents in our association and the real estate professionals in our community who need to be aware of discrimination happening in our community and the Ventura and Los Angeles counties, as well as around the country. So, some quick housekeeping. We do have 2 restrooms here, so if you need to take a quick bio break, please feel free to use those restrooms at any time. And I'd like to say that we realtors do recognize the significance of fair housing and reaffirm our commitment to upholding these laws and offering fair, equitable service to every American in their search for homes and property. In an effort to continue raising awareness of our association's members on fair housing, today we have the honor of hearing from an award-winning investigative reporter, Bill Dedman. Now, you may have seen his published documentary, Long Island Divided. Have you seen that amazing documentary? If not, he'll be sharing more insights on that. And he is also a member of the Asian Real Estate Association of America, the California Association of Black Real Estate Professionals, and the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, as well as Differently Global Alliance. Before we get into Bill, I do want to also thank Rick Schrader and Many Mansions for allowing us to have this space. Rick is the CEO of Many Mansions. Please come on. And if you would, please share a little bit more about Many Mansions and the work that you do in this amazing community.
I will, Brooke. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to Hillcrest Villas Apartments. Many Mansions is a nonprofit affordable housing and service provider. We develop affordable housing, and Hillcrest Villas Apartments is one of our affordable housing properties that we've developed. We've developed over 20 such properties throughout Ventura County and Los Angeles County, servicing people that are low income, extremely low income, disabled, formerly homeless. And in fact, Hillcrest Villas here is 60 units. I do welcome everyone to look around after the presentation. Of the 60 units, 30 units are specifically reserved for people experiencing homelessness and also having an accompanying disability. So affordable housing plays a big part in advancing fair housing. And I'm looking forward to Mr. Dedman and the panelists today on how we can even go further than that. I do want to welcome everyone to Many Mansions. If you want to learn more about us, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. All right, let's get to Bill Dedman. He has a very impressive bio. He told me to cherry pick what I wanted to say, but I want to say all of it. Bill Dedman is a Pulitzer and Peabody Award-winning investigative reporter and a best-selling author. He's spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and banking and real estate associations. Bill received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on The Color of Money. His series on racial discrimination by banks and savings and loan associations in middle-income Black neighborhoods. The Color of Money led to expanded federal laws on disclosure of loan data, new financing for middle-income homebuyers, and greater awareness of systemic discrimination. So let's just give him a hand there for that great work. 30 years later, Bill was one of our 4 lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. It was called Long Island Divided. The investigation, published in November of 2019, revealed that Long Island's largest residential real estate brokerages help reinforce racial segregation through illegal steering of customers. Long Island Divided led to a reckoning in the real estate industry with a new national training for agents, more testing of brokerages, and new state laws on fair housing. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Please help me welcome Bill Dedman.
Good morning. You can hear me in the back. You let me know. Make a pain noise at some point if you can't. And thank you, Brooke. Thank you to everyone who organized today. Christine, your committee, thank you very much. And to Will for making everything work smoothly. My goal for this session is for it to be helpful to you, but also challenging, to give you some things to think about. How can people be treated unfairly even when we intend to act fairly? We're going to talk about some of the most difficult questions, such as what can and should agents say about schools. We're going to talk about brokers and their responsibility and specific steps that they might take. I want to leave you with some best practices, not just to pass a test if you're tested, not just to obey the law, but to help the community. I start with this perspective. I assume that all of you want to make sure, not just those who came today, but everybody in your association wants to make sure that everybody who calls or walks in or contacts you over the internet is treated fairly. That's a given. It might be surprising to you. It was definitely surprising to me when a newspaper's investigation prompted a positive response from the real estate industry. We don't get a lot of that. I've spoken with more than 100 real estate associations across the country. It seems that our testing on fair housing has at least started a conversation and prompted some action. Let me give you a couple of examples. When the CEO of Realogy, now called Anywhere Real Estate, you know it as the owner of the brands Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's International, and others. When that CEO says, these videos showed us that we as a company need to do testing to know whether or not we're obeying the law. Well, that's a significant change in mindset. And the reaction of the National Association of Realtors was, we'll make it happen. NAR is doing tests now. They have a pilot project in a couple of cities with the cooperation of the brokers who know that they're being tested, but the agents don't. But the head of the agency does. And those wouldn't be public tests. You won't see those on YouTube. But that would still have an effect if the company, the brand, was testing agents. As you probably know, NAR has also instituted a minimum training requirement. It doesn't go beyond your continuing ed requirements in California, but nationally, a 2-hour minimum continuing ed requirement starting next year. It couldn't have been more soft as a requirement, but you have to understand that many states had no specific number of hours in their state law for fair housing training. Often it would be lumped in with some broader course and would get 15 points. So the industry thinking seems to be, we better get ahead of this. If we don't react to this, then there will continue to be more embarrassing headlines, more media investigations, and more government investigations, testing, and regulation. Besides, there is a recognition that this is the right thing to do to fix these issues. In other words, that fair housing is one of those strange 12-month laws. It's not just the law in fair housing month. I don't know if anybody knew that, but it's the law in June too. Now, I want to carry through with you some specifics about why we did the tests, how we did them, what steps we took to try to make them as fair and telling as possible. So we're going to dive in first to a little bit of an introductory part of our documentary film. We called our stories Long Island Divided. There are about a dozen traditional news articles on a website that I'll share with you. It's free. You don't have to subscribe to get to it. And there's also a film, 45-minute documentary film. We called that Testing the Divide, and many of you have seen that documentary. I'm going to show you just about 10 minutes of that 45-minute film in this section. In this first clip I'd like to share with you, there's a little bit of introduction. And then we meet an agent who sees two buyers who are asking for the same housing in the same price range with the same area at the center of their search. But one receives help from the agent and the other is denied service. I want to take just a minute on a personal note to try to explain why I think of this as an important issue. I'm not in your profession. And I just want to share just a minute of my personal family story, which may be in many ways different from yours and in many ways the same. We're all on the same path in some ways. This is my grandfather. He raised a family outside of Nashville where he was the janitor at the DuPont plant and raised 5 kids in a little house that he paid for through payroll deduction from his job as a janitor. My dad fought the Germans in France and then went to law school on the GI Bill, and he said the main lesson he learned was that he didn't like lawyers, but he went into the profession anyway. This is my mother's family. My mother's the teenager on the oldest child on the back left. Her mother, her 2 sisters, and their father in a wheelchair. My mother was helping her sisters get ready for church one morning on Sunday, and her mother came running. Run for the doctor, run for the doctor. They didn't have a telephone. Run for the doctor because a mule had reared back and had fallen on my grandfather, her father, and broken his back. He raised a family, ran a farm, ran a store. My mother became a respected school teacher. I mention all that so I could tell you about my grandmother. That's the same grandmother on the right, but younger, on her honeymoon in Chattanooga. Once she pulled up in front of a little old country church in the car, and she said to me, "This is where your grandfather and I got married." And I said, "Oh, right here. Well, what do you remember? When was that?" She said, 26. I said, "Well, what do you remember about that? Do you remember coming out? Did people throw rice? What did you remember?" She said, no, you don't understand. She would say, "You've got the wrong end of the stick." She said, "No, right here is where we got married. Right here, in the car. We didn't go into the church. We opened the passenger door and the minister stood right here next to the car, and the maid of honor and the best man were in the back seat. And we dropped them off and went on the honeymoon." And I said, "Ma, I don't understand. Why didn't you go into the church?" And she said, "Well, I guess we just didn't have any better sense." Now, I found this an unsatisfying answer. You may have people in your family who've been conceived in cars. I know we do. But I never knew that we had anybody who'd been married in a car. That was a new one for me. Well, I checked out her explanation later, and I realized that my grandfather had gone to the wrong courthouse. Have you ever gone to the wrong town hall or the courthouse? He'd gotten the marriage license in one county, but the church is just over the county line. And the pastor said, I can't marry you there. But the parking lot is in the county where you have the license. That's why they got married. I mention all that because I was thinking, where did they go after the honeymoon? Well, they went back to his parents' farm, which they ended up inheriting, and it became the farm where my mother was born. So there was property in both sides of our family, one through payroll deduction, one through inheritance. And that equity paid for the grandchildren to go to college. It paid for cars so we could go off and have internships. It gave us, I think most importantly, a cushion. Think about your family. In my family, lots of things have gone wrong. I can think of suicide, unwelcome, unexpected child, divorces, drug addiction. I can think of lots of trouble in our family. And owning houses helped smooth out those bumps. So I think we tend to think of property ownership as like the portal to the American dream. I also think about it as a fallback. It's what keeps us going when we have trouble. As long as it's not blocked by corruption or famine or war or acts of God or discrimination. Sometimes there are things that can get in the way and keep us from taking that first step. And that's how I think about it. There was a time when the phrase property rights was used in the industry to mean as a justification for discrimination. Property rights meant my right not to sell a property to you if I don't like how you look, or where you worship or don't, and where your people come from. It's hard for us to cast our mind back, unless you're as old as I am, but you know, the National Association of Realtors opposed the passage of the Fair Housing Act 53 years ago. For more than 50 years, well into my lifetime, it was a violation of your realtor code of ethics to show a home in a white neighborhood to a person of color. Now that's changed. Now your code of ethics calls for the broadest possible expanse of home ownership. But these problems are not all in the past. Take redlining. Last year, Berkshire Hathaway settled a redlining case in Pennsylvania where its lending division was refusing to make loans in minority neighborhoods. There have been well-publicized studies and anecdotes on the issue of appraisal bias. Those studies show that it's not really accurate to say, oh, race never has anything to do with it, it's just by the comps. Well, some people were getting different comps than others. And the facts in the file didn't support appraisals. And you may not be a study person, you may be an anecdote person. There have been the widely publicized anecdotes like the black family, a professor. They didn't like their appraisal, so they got a reappraisal on a refinance. But they got the white professor, a colleague, to come over and meet the appraiser, and they took down all the pictures of the black family members, and their home's value went up more than $450,000. There's been a lot of attention in the last couple of years, and there will continue to be, about the sort of circular nature of, think how self-justifying these practices are. Steering by agents, lower appraisals, lenders avoiding an area, steering by agents, and around it goes. We need some sort of short circuit. We need a device to short circuit that circle. And we have one. It's the Fair Housing Act. It's just been very little enforced. And if you don't enforce the speeding laws, what are people going to do? I want to give you one specific thing to think about in your justification of your discussion of property rights. And I'll tell you the key words on this. You don't have to read the words from back there. As one of its responses to Long Island Divided, NAR took the unusual step of evaluating the state laws in every state to see whether they met a national standard, whether they supported fully fair housing in enforcement and in training. And they gave every state a score. California's score is a 7, which is a B, I think it'd be fair to say, or a B minus. I just want to give you a couple of specifics from California's latest results from March in the NAR survey, which has been shared with state associations. You get points for requiring fair housing training in your state law as a pre-licensing for brokers and agents, but your state law has no specifics as to how many hours that should be. You do have a specific number of hours, I believe, it says in this survey, for post-licensing, for continuing education for fair housing. Enforcement actions on fair housing are not made public under your state law. The state law doesn't require that they be made public. We're talking about what the law is here. And those are a couple of points that when your association is lobbying on fair housing, on property rights, is fair housing part of your property rights agenda? Or is that a different thing that we have a committee for and we look at once a year? That's the kind of question to consider, to add into your discussion. Okay. I'm going to take you back to 2 earlier investigations because of the lessons that they have in common with Long Island Divided. I keep seeing the same lessons over and over in these different investigations. I've spent about 30 years doing stories that I think roughly you could lump under the word profiling or judging books by their cover. And we're going to talk about 2 of those quickly here. The stories in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that Brooke mentioned were called The Color of Money. And those stories were about redlining, the practice of banks, especially in savings and loans, not doing business on all of their map, or collecting deposits from all of their map, but only making loans in some neighborhoods. Redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, and this was back in the late 80s. It was thought of as something from the 60s or 70s. Our clippings in the newspaper's library had stopped. We didn't have anything new in the file in 20 years because it was an old thing. It wasn't something still happening. But we dug into how the banks operated in Atlanta and other cities. We found banks closing branches in minority areas, even though they had higher income in those areas than some of the poorer white areas where they were opening branches. We saw differences in where lenders would reach out to the real estate brokerages to share with them their rates and special programs, and then there were others that were not being reached out to. We even saw differences in which branches you could put a loan application. We compared specific neighborhoods, a black neighborhood with higher home ownership, higher household income, higher education. Remember, Atlanta is the home of black CEOs from Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola and Coretta Scott King, and the banks were not making loans in their neighborhoods either. And then white neighborhoods with lesser statistics, but where the banks had a much higher market share of the loans being made there. These 2 maps really are crude, and the journalism students today laugh at how crude they are, but they still tell the story. The top map is where Atlanta's black neighborhoods were at that time, and the bottom map is where the banks in Atlanta rarely lent money. The main thing to understand, the main lesson to draw, is that the customer would have no way to know where the banks were not lending money. Now, let's connect that to a story in Boston called Speed Trap, and both of these are online, and the address will be on the screen later. This is about racial profiling in policing. It's not about the most egregious example or headline grabbing or serious example. It's about a simple matter of when a police officer has pulled you over for speeding and he's standing at the window, some people might get a ticket and some people might get a warning. You know, an interesting thing of being stopped for speeding is that in your lingo, we're all pre-qualified for the ticket, right? But some might get a break that others don't get. What we found in Massachusetts was that if you look at every ticket and warning in the state, you can do a very good job of predicting who gets the ticket and who gets the warning if you know the age, sex, and race of the driver. For example, women, does it surprise you that women got a break compared with men committing the same violation? Women were more likely to get a warning. Does it surprise you to learn that that break for women will run out when you reach about age 40? Does that surprise you? I talked with a college student. We found in the records she had gotten 4 warnings in 3 weeks. Does it surprise you that minorities, especially black and Hispanic men, were much more likely than white drivers to get the ticket, not the warning, again, for going the same speed over in the same zone? Now we have 3 different stories here. We have steering by real estate agents, we have redlining by banks, we have profiling by police officers. Taking those 3 together, here are some lessons that I think you can draw logically from these. First, the absence of complaints tells you nothing about whether or not your office is obeying the law. If you get a ticket or a warning, do you know what officers are giving other drivers who commit the same violation? Do any of your clients or customers see the listings that you give to others? We would have no basis for a complaint. A lot of people think of fair housing and discrimination issues in general as something that results from complaints. But we have to remember that this isn't about complaint. People would have no basis they would have no reason to know that they might suspect, but they'd have no way to prove that they were being treated differently in many cases. So a fix for steering can't be to say, well, if anybody complains, we will take it very seriously. I've been here 30 years and no one's ever complained. Those are dodges, not fixes. Second lesson, with no disrespect to the diversity committee, diversity alone will not solve these problems. I'm not sure these are necessarily a diversity issue. I'll explain. People ask, did the minority real estate agents also steer customers? Yes, you'll see them in the videos. We have South Asian agents and Hispanic agents, Egyptian agents, and we have a very diverse mix of agents that we tested, treating white and minority customers differently. This really shouldn't surprise us anymore. Just as in policing, in the Floyd case in Minnesota, you had 4 police officers of 4 very different racial backgrounds involved in that case. Third lesson, little policies make a big difference. We saw customers come back from a real estate agent to our newspaper office with a thick folder of information about schools and the communities and services and referrals, and we would say to the other customer, where's your folder? I didn't get one. We'd watch the video. They're right, they didn't get one. They'd seen the same agent and had made the same requests. That seems like something that you could fix. Absence of a policy, lack of attention to detail, And I know a tough business where people are working part-time and out of their car and at home, it's tough to have quality control across multiple agents. But that could make all the difference. Do all the agents in your office have the same policy for qualifying buyers to send them listings and take them out? It's not just does each agent have the same policy with each buyer, it's does each agent have the same policy, because the first half of the test might have been done with a different agent. You're the second half, and you won't know what happened on the first. Do you require pre-approval for every buyer? That's perfectly okay, it's legal, good for you. I don't want to waste my time showing people houses if they can't afford it. Maybe they don't know their price range. I send them a bunch of listings, they're going to want to go see them. Let's get them approved first. Perfectly okay. It's applied to everyone. Or you may say, no, this person in my office here, they're my customer. They have a heartbeat. We'll get them up for a mortgage. We'll refer them to a lender. We'll get them ready to buy a home. Perfectly okay if everybody's treated the same. If not, then that's how you end up with a Google search for your name leading to fair housing violations. Let me explain why the editors at Newsday were sending out testers. Some of you may know New York. It's really not so different from here. We also don't signal before changing lanes. It's the same.
Like,
we're a suburban area outside of New York City, east of New York City. It's a suburban newspaper in 2 counties that have a population of about 3 million altogether. So that's about the same population as Nevada or Arkansas.
and our two cousins.
But Long Island is the home of Levittown, famous for its racial discrimination against GIs who were not white coming home from World War II, who were not allowed to get mortgages. And still today, especially Black and Hispanic property owners are in their own areas. It's a very segregated place. How segregated? There are more than 200 communities on Long Island, more than 200 school districts. A majority of the Black residents are in only 8 of those.
Out of the 200.
Well, is that by choice? Well, that's fine. But we have heard for years from Black home buyers, from our colleagues at the newspaper saying that they encountered problems when they tried to shop for a home outside of those few areas. We could have tested on many different aspects of the fair housing laws. Religion, for example, we considered. But we tested just on race and ethnicity. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. Our tests followed what fair housing agencies do when they test compliance with the law, sending out testers posing as home buyers. We added hidden cameras to record audio and video without telling the people we were recording. And that is legal in most states. It's legal in New York. It's not legal in California, as you probably know. There are 11 or 12, depending on how you count it, states like California that require everybody in a conversation to know it's being taped before that taping is legal. Most states, if one person in the conversation, and that can be the home buyer, the tester, one person knows it's being taped, they're doing the taping, then it's legal. You could say that your California law makes it easier on discriminators, but maybe that's coming in a little too hot. I'm from out of town. I want to show you some of our testers. 25 of them we trained. They saw 93 agents, some work in pairs, so we did 86 tests. Here are some of our Black testers.
Right.
They did not know that they were being sent different neighborhoods, listings for different areas than their white counterparts who had asked for the same thing in the same area. They didn't know that they were being given fewer listings. 50% fewer listings than their white counterparts. And they didn't know that they were being screened differently. And of course, they didn't hear any of what the same agent said to the white buyer, disparaging the communities that these buyers were being sent to. They didn't hear that. It startled us when some agents began their presentation. Remember, these were new buyers. They just met with information that violated the fair housing laws. I tried to figure out what that was about. I'm not a mind reader, but I did leave some of these tests with the impression that the agent was boasting about how good he was at steering. That was part of the service that he was selling to the white buyer. His first question to the white buyer was, "Do you know Long Island?" And she said no. His second question was, "Do you know Hempstead, Baldwin, Elmont, Roosevelt, Hempstead?" He named the places with the heaviest black population, and in some cases, high Hispanic population. And then he told her not to get off the Southern State Parkway until she passed those communities. And none of that advice was given to the other buyer. And remember, race wasn't mentioned at all, but clearly in violation of the law. Now, how did we do these tests? Our testers gave the agents the same circumstances, the same requirements of their search. They were first timers, so they didn't have many preferences, and they weren't selling another property, so that was not involved. They asked for the same price range, centered in the same area, same number of bedrooms, they had the same family size, they had the same number of children in the public schools. And they were prepared to give the same income or credit scores if asked, but they weren't asked. All they were asked about was, are you pre-approved for a mortgage? On which they were the same. They were not. Now, we shopped for houses at different price ranges. Expensive area like yours here, you won't think it's expensive when you hear the prices, but we do in New York think it's expensive. These tests were done in 2016 to 2019, and in that time there was very little single family, there were hardly any single family homes in this area below 400,000, not many below 5. We made sure homes were available wherever we were doing the tests, and so we started at 4, we did 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, a million. We did testing at 3 million. We did testing at 7 million because we thought we might get different results in different levels of the community, but we did not. Now, of course, it was always the same price range for the two testers who were matched up against each other in the same test. How did we pick the brokerages that we tested? We picked the biggest. We picked the 12 brands that had together more than half of the agents and more than half of the listings in our area. So familiar names, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Keller Williams, etc. And how did we pick the agents to be tested? We didn't pick them. We let the brokers decide which of their agents they would put forward today for testing. That would make it pretty easy to pass, wouldn't it? Yeah. But they didn't know they were doing the deciding. We just did walk-ins. We called the brokerage. We got whoever they gave us. And then we made sure to arrange to see the same agent with the second tester. Notice that's a break. The next test doesn't have to give you. Brokers, you're responsible for making sure that two customers at your agency are treated the same, whether they see the same person or different people. But we thought it would be more telling to see what would happen if they saw the same agent. We did not feel comfortable declaring winners and losers. So we had two fair housing experts. One you met runs a testing agency in New York City and has done testing for the Department of Justice. The other is the law professor from the University of Kentucky who writes the legal textbook on what's a violation of the fair housing laws. And only if both of them, reviewing our videos, looking at the maps, only if both of them found significant evidence that they thought would be presentable in a federal court case. That was our standard. Only if they found significant differences, independently, the two of them, only then did we throw a penalty flag on it, on an agent. Now, overall, the results. Asian American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts. In a significant way, 19% of our tests, so 2 out of 10 on average. Latino American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts. In a significant way, 39% of our tests, 4 out of 10. And African American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts, 49% of our tests. It was a coin flip, 50-50 chance of having significant discrimination 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act. Out of 12 companies, 2 passed all their tests. If we sent a pair, if we did a test at your brokerage, we would do 3 tests at your brokerage, at that office, because we thought that would be more fair. And if we tested one office, we would do at least 3 at another office as well. Sometimes we did 3 offices. And 2 brokerage, 2 brands passed all their tests. One was the local Sotheby's International, and the other, you know from the Shark Tank show, you know its former owner, Corcoran.
You saw it.
But she doesn't own the company. But the rest failed at least 1 and often multiple tests. So it is fair to say, a fair statement would be that most of the largest real estate companies in our suburban area were contributing to the segregation in our housing. Not creating it, perhaps, but perpetuating it. Then there were illegal comments made by the agents. You've heard a couple. Comments about the race or ethnicity of people who live in an area as a way of discouraging one of the buyers from looking in that area when the same information was not given to the other buyer. Or comments about schools, crime, and resale values. That's steering too. You don't want to buy here, you'll get a bad resale value. Oh, you might like it here. As subtle as that. Notice that the minority buyers in our test were not subjected to any racial comments, outward displays of racism, none of that, nothing. We are long past the days of signs that say whites only. Now it's more subtle. Now it's only the white buyers who were told information, statements were made to them that violate the law about race or schools or crime or resale values. You only have to steer one group to steer the market. Right? Education doesn't actually seem to be the only cure here. They noticed how aware many of these agents were of the law. I'm reminded of an agent recently in North Dakota who was being tested at a rental property. And the person they were showing around was in a wheelchair, and they talked about accommodations for close parking. And the agent on the way out said to the tester, we run a good ship here. You know, we follow all the laws. We make sure to follow the fair housing laws and make all reasonable accommodations. And we really try to run a good property. We don't let any of the Somalis move in. That's what it said on the tape. Guess what the Fair Housing Agency did next? Yeah. You know, they were so close to passing that test. They were leaving. They had just passed the test. And then, in a way, I regret showing you the comments, because I think comments can put too much emphasis on saying the wrong thing. And some people will tend to view fair housing laws as some sort of political correctness, that it's about not saying the wrong thing, or as we saw, not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it, but feeling free to say those things to someone you think won't complain about it. It might be that we need more attention on what brokers and agents do, not just on what they say. Are they providing the same professional service to everyone? Why does one person get the advice about resale values in that community and the other person does not? That's different professional service and is against the laws. I'd like to share one more example here with you. This is a very straightforward example of steering in the classic sense of sending people to communities that more closely match the buyer's race or ethnicity. We saw a more complicated pattern of steering as well, where the two buyers would get the same listings or listings in the same area, and we were very lenient. We'd say, well, you passed your test. But the agent for both buyers was skipping over minority neighborhoods and schools and communities. Leapfrogging, going around any community with even a modest minority population, was skipping that area for both buyers. We passed them because they treated the people the same. And fair housing enforcement has traditionally given that a pass. It's clearly in violation of the law. And I think it's an area where you might see more legal action in the future. Think about who's harmed and think about who has a lawsuit. If agents treat everybody the same but skip over communities that have a Hispanic population that's over a certain level, or Asian or Black, etc. Well, who's being harmed? Well, anybody trying to sell a home in those communities is being harmed, because fewer buyers means lower prices. Their agents are being harmed. They get to be plaintiffs in this federal lawsuit against the brokers that are routinely steering customers around the area where they have the listings. Right? The communities are being harmed. Lower property values, less money for sidewalks and schools and playgrounds. Right? All of this is pretty self-evident. And the evidence for that lawsuit, where would they have to go to get it? Well, at the end of every conversation with a new buyer, the agent would turn and click on the screen to generate listings. You might think of that as generating Exhibit 1 for the federal lawsuit. It's all in the computer. I don't think this is far-fetched or far away in our future, that you'll have a community that says enough of this, and its agents and homeowners will say, this is robbing us of the money to put the grandkids to college. And we know who to go to recover. Think for a moment about the point where this agent went astray. The text message about gangs gets all of our attention. But remember that she broke the law earlier when she sent listings in 2 different places with different racial compositions to 2 people of 2 different races who'd asked for the same area. She broke the law then. We threw her a life preserver. She's in the water. We were trying to help her out. So notice what you saw was the white tester on the front porch of one of those houses outside of Brentwood that he'd been given. And he says to her, by the way, I looked up some listings online. I went to Zillow or wherever, and I got some listings from Realtor.com. And those are closer to the center of our search. He mentions the nursing home where his mother is, and that's where they need to be. These are closer. And she says, well, I'll look at those. So that was the life preserver, which she then ignored and sent him the text message about gang activity. We gave her every possible chance to grab onto it, but she did not. I'm often asked what happened to the agents in our tests. About half of them got some punishment from the state, and I don't regret the others. I think it's perfectly fine if the state, they got a lot of bad publicity, and I never thought about this as really being about specific agents. We thought of it as testing the industry. We thought about it as testing the brands. And mostly what resulted in New York from these tests was new state laws. Every broker has to have on their website a statement that says whether or not they check ID for customers, whether or not they require pre-approval for customers, whether or not you have to sign a broker agreement. 1 out of 10 of our minority buyers was blocked by being told, you need to sign a contract with our brokerage. We require it for everybody. And the same agent did not require it for the white buyer before sending them listings. That was 1 out of 10 just failed off. They couldn't get out of the starting blocks. Right? Those changes in state law and revamping the curriculum for education in New York, I think, were the local effects, much more important than some individual brokers who lost their licenses, a few, or who got sanctioned in lesser ways. Let's talk a little bit about intent. Some agents may think that if the steering is not intentional, if race isn't mentioned, if religion isn't mentioned, if they say, well, I had no intention that had to do with those areas, that it wouldn't be illegal. It was because the agents showed awareness of the law, but were breaking the law anyway, that NAR created Fairhaven. I bet most of you have taken the Fairhaven class, right? A 1-hour video game where you're the buyer, but you also might be the agent. You might switch places, and fair housing issues come in and block the sale and cause problems. And it gives you what? Not just an understanding of the law, it's an empathy machine. It's there to give some empathy of the effects of these fair housing problems, even if there's no ill intent. You're aware that if 2 buyers are being treated differently, and they differ in a protected class, then the difference can be significant enough to violate the law. It is very hard to find 2 people who are not in 2 different protected classes somewhere along the line. How many of these lines are you on? You're on all of them, aren't you? All of us are on all 7 of these lines in the federal law because we all have some national origin or religion or not, etc. This race or that. We have children or we don't. That's what's meant by family status. If people are being treated differently and they differ in any of these ways, then the agent and the agent's broker have violated the law. You're aware that states and communities can add additional protected classes. And California and New York are the king of adding additional protected classes. I mentioned military or veteran status, which is not in the federal law, but you're one of the few. You might, let's see. You could say military and veteran status is something we care about in California, but they don't care about in Arizona. Would that be too harsh? It's okay, I'll be going home soon. Source of lawful income is a disputed area in a lot of states, but it has to do with vouchers and the source of your income, as long as you're not a drug dealer. Your state law does something that I don't know of any other state law that does. It basically adds another category that says, or anything else, or any other arbitrary basis. So you have what I would think would be the strongest compared with others. One thing I don't see on here, am I missing it? In some states like New York, a victim of domestic violence is an element in the state law because we don't want people to be discouraged from calling the police. But a lot of landlords might put you out of your apartment if the police are coming there. So you're discouraged from calling the police.
It's under family.
Is that in here?
It's under family, the previous one.
It's under family, it's considered under family status? And
the other one, the previous one.
The other slide.
I'm not sure that's considered under the federal law as under family status. And some states have added that, but California's not. I'm not a lawyer in California or any other state, so I won't pretend to be a legal expert. But I noticed that that's specified in some state laws, but not here. Okay. Let's talk a bit about schools. you're aware of the simple advice from the National Association of Realtors and others that say, be careful not to pick and choose schools. What we found over and over was that agents would explain to our buyers that schools was the basis. Everything is based on schools, they would say. And some agents would write down a list of recommended schools, sending the two buyers back to the newspaper office with two different lists. They were so helpful. Two different lists of recommended schools. I think the important understanding to have is that America's schools differ from community to community, from district to district, so often differ somewhat in race or religion or other characteristics. And therefore, steering someone toward a particular school or away from a particular school, or sending one group these listings and another group those listings, is the same under the law as sending them listings that are just based directly on race or religion or other characteristics that are reflected in the demographics of those schools. Now, some places have school choice, but in most of America, where you live determines where your kids go to school, which means that housing segregation and school segregation run parallel.
Right.
The other key concept, I think, to take away about schools is to realize that we're in an environment now where school ratings are popular. They're on our listings in many cases. They're on the website. The bottom of a listing on Realtor.com has the school ratings. School ratings are based primarily on something that doesn't tell you how good a school is. School ratings are based primarily on school test scores. And anybody who studies schools knows that school test scores tell you mostly how affluent are the parents who live in that district and send their kids to that school. Because in America, there's a very strong correlation, it's not 100%, but very strong, between income and education of the parents and how their kids will do on school test scores. And there's a strong correlation in America between race and ethnicity and income and education.
Yeah.
And therefore, just steering parents or the white parents toward the, quote, better schools with higher test scores is continuing to perpetuate segregation. Now, everybody in education understands that. Many people in real estate understand that. Your customers, clients, don't understand that. And they expect you to tell them which ones are the good schools. And NAR suggests that the right answer to that is, I'm going to send you all to school. And then when you tell me what school you want, I'll send you just those. Just like I'll send you all the houses until you tell me you don't want corner lots or you have to have a pool. And then you'll get fewer listings every time you add another requirement. Another way to put it is they need to do their own homework. Talk to people, read, go visit the schools. If it's the band program or lacrosse you care about, go meet the people in those programs. Talk to parents. You know, if schools are important to them, it's worth their time. If they were buying a boat, they would go look at boats. That's the best advice. Now, I want to share with you some specific best practices. And I'll tell you that this is my list. I've basically taken suggestions that NAR and others have used, but I focused them on my own experience of watching these tests. Because we used to discuss, we would talk about, well, what if they stop steering? We're doing this 3-year project with a team of journalists. Can we all agree that the worst possible thing that could have happened would be that they would stop breaking the law before we were finished? That would be horrible. But we would discuss, well, could they stop steering? Like, if you were the broker and your goal was to pass all the tests, what would make sure you'd pass all the tests? And so that advice is incorporated here with other elements. First suggestion, remember that they may be taking notes, or in other states you may be on camera. Treat every person with the same enthusiasm. If you're having an open house, and we're going to share a link to these, and we're going to share a page that has them all up here so you don't have to take a picture if you don't want. If at an open house you offer somebody a soft drink, offer everybody a soft drink. You know, if you're gonna send somebody home with brochures, send everybody with the same brochures. Follow up with the same enthusiasm with every customer. By checklists, I mean having a routine that increases the chance that what you have is a project that you can replicate from person to person. We think of checklists perhaps as a remedial thing. Oh, a beginner would need a checklist. No, studies have shown us that the more important something is, the more we need a checklist. Surgeons use checklists because taking those sponges out of the patient is important. If you're landing an airplane and your mind is elsewhere that day, you will have a better day if the checklist reminds you to put down the landing gear.
Push it, plane.
So you could have a list of procedures for your brokerage and for yourself of what you do with every new customer, every new buyer, every new seller.
Ew.
You can have the same procedure for assigning walk-in customers to an agent, not based on the appearance of the customer. Explain your services in the same way. Obtain the same initial information from everyone. Offer the same referrals and services and information to everyone. Similarly, you can work out standard answers to the straightforward questions and the minefield questions such as, which schools are good? It might be helpful to have written down a reminder for the agents in your brokerage that school test scores don't tell you which schools are good. Write that on the whiteboard 100 times. Encourage parents to do their own homework, etc. Similarly, you're communicating all the time, and you could have and may have templates, things you copy and paste, that are about each stage in the buying and selling process, so that the same enthusiasm and the same information, if somebody were to look at it, boy, would they be hard-pressed to find that you treated these two people any different. Talk about the property, not about the people. I think we all understand the difference between the good advice of run in the neighborhoods, go drive around, you'll talk to people, you tell me which neighborhood, and follow the mothers who are waiting to meet the school bus, and you'll know which areas you don't want to buy in. I think we can discern some difference between those two. If you're going to share information on resale values, share it with everybody. If you're going to share it for one community, share it for all the communities with all your buyers. Why not? Stick to factual information, not opinion. This is very hard. I think a lot of these are hard because customers expect, or we may think that the customers will expect you, the professional, to give you guidance. That's why we came to you, so you could help us pick the right neighborhood. If you look at the advertising of some real estate companies, it basically boils down to, we will keep you from making a mistake by buying in the wrong neighborhood. And it's hard, it's pretty easy to slip over from that into some fair housing issue. The reputation of a community is not a fact. Declining schools is not a fact. These are opinions. Refer customers to direct sources of information. If crime is what they care about, I saw a video yesterday about your community pretending to share some sort of trends in crime, with a realtor saying, go here, don't go there. It's on YouTube. It's not a good idea. That agent's broker ought to have a conversation. Tell people to go where they can get crime stats. Tell people where they can get the state's school district report cards, etc. Qualify customers in the same way. This would have passed 1 out of 10 of our tests that was failed. If you require pre-approval, require it for everyone. And the state legislature in New York saw that that was so important that they put it in our state law, but it's a practice that you could carry forward. This would have passed all the rest of the tests. Give all the listings to a buyer that meet their objective criteria. If they've come to you and they don't know what they want, except they don't like ranch houses or green ones, well then, which listing should they get? All the non-ranch houses that aren't green, that's what they should get. So it really shouldn't be that hard for two people who ask for the same thing to be getting in their email the next morning the same listings. That's the test. Think to yourself, if we did 100 tests this weekend, right, throughout all the communities, or we would, Moore Park, we would through all the communities in your Ventura County or in your association, right? White testers, black testers, Asian testers, Hispanic testers, Muslims, Jews, Christians, couples, singles, people with children, people without children. We did 100 tests. Think to yourself, what's going to be our passing rate? 100 pairs go out. They see the same brokerage or they even see the same agent. On Monday morning, how many of those 100 will be receiving the same listings? They ask for the same price range and the same housing in the same area. Think to yourself, I won't ask you to announce it out loud, but think, is our passing rate anywhere close to 90 or 100? You can educate buyers and owners about the fair housing laws. I think this comes up mostly in rental and apartment owners, landlords who may say, oh, I don't want any children here, or some other fair housing violation. You will have some sellers who will try to dictate what type of person will buy the home. And if you have that conversation earlier with them, it might decrease the chance that you'll be having it at the end when an offer comes in. I've heard it pointed out that yes, you have a legal obligation of fidelity to your client, but that ends when they're insisting that you break the law. And so you can counsel them. You can try to say, no, that wouldn't be legal. No agent can do that for you. But if they won't listen, you may have to drop them. You may have to say you'll have to get it. You've heard a lot of discussion about the love letters or pick-me letters that buyers keep reading news articles telling them that they should send those to sellers in a competitive market, saying, oh, we want to spend Christmas in your house. Here's a picture of our children. And I know it's possible to write such a letter without disclosing anything about your family's national origin, family status, veteran status, age. None of us have ever seen such a letter. And so they're discouraged because they tempt sellers and sellers' agents into committing or being accused of a fair housing violation by picking buyers who look like them. That's the rationale. So your associations have encouraged you to decide what's legal, decide what your policy is, and stick to it on those letters. I'm not pretending to tell you the law. It could be in your broker agreement. It could be in your agreement with the seller or buyer that I don't pass those letters on. But I'm not pretending to give you legal advice. Talk to your lawyers about that. But that's the rationale. Just two more. I understand that you may have an obligation to share offers with the sellers. Okay, we get that. But in a very competitive market, when they're choosing among multiple offers, when we're in that kind of situation, you could present for them a spreadsheet that says offer number 1. It doesn't have the name there. It says offer number 2, and it gives the financing, the terms, and when they want to close, and all the relevant facts. And it puts the focus on what the finances are, and not the focus on, well, there were 3 Asian buyers, and then there were 2 Jewish buyers, but I chose this part. And that's where you end up in trouble. Last suggestion, for brokers particularly, NAR has a report card where brokers can monitor the actions of agents. It's in the broker's manual. We'll provide a link to it later. It's called the Equal Service Report. And it's a form for recording what did we ask them for? What did they ask us for? What did we get from them? What did we give them? And it's a way for the broker to come by later and say, well, why did they get these, but they didn't get those? Because I see here what they asked for. It's not proof of anything, but it raises a red flag to have a conversation between broker. Another way to think about it is that there's just too much steering going on for it to be committed only by bad people. Good people have to be steering too. It wouldn't be so easy to find. The whole point of our exercise was, is it still a thing? Is it hard to find if you test as fairly as you can? It is not hard to find. So I construe from that good people are also doing it. So that wanting to do the right thing is not the necessary thing. Now, you may have done this before. I urge you to share the film and the stories with your colleagues, with your customers, etc. But also have a conversation. I think that's what's needed. A conversation in your broker. It's not a conversation about who's most likely to be a bigot. This is not a helpful conversation to have, and I don't think it gets at the point anyway, does it? I think the right conversation is, how can the broker be assured that every customer or client is going to be treated the same? Right? How do we reach a point of confidence for the broker who really would like to keep her or his license? I think that's the conversation to have. In other words, it's more of an engineering conversation. How does it work? What happens? What do some do? What do others do? How can we make that as regularized and replicable as possible? Watching these videos might open our eyes to what's being done wrong, but it doesn't really get us to what to be done right. And just thinking in terms of what not to say is not, don't be a bigot. That's not really getting to an answer, is it? I think some of the specific steps that are trying to make a routine process might work better. A checklist.
Now we're going to introduce you to 4 organizations representing diversity in our community. We'll hear about each organization's mission and the challenges that they're working on, finding solutions for, and potentially how we as realtors and real estate professionals can help. We have Winnie Davis. Winnie is representing ARIA today. ARIA is an acronym for the Asian Real Estate Association of America. Winnie is an international president, elite top 3% in sales with over 20 years of experience.
Thank you. Asian Real Estate Association of America is dedicated to promoting sustainable homeownership in the Asian American community. And also we created strong national voice for the Asian housing as well as for the real estate professional to serve this dynamic market. And ARIA we are now 21 years old. By the way, our next conference is going to be in Las Vegas. When we're 21, we finally can join when we get to Vegas in October 2024. So we're all looking forward to that. And how ARIA, I want to give you a little background about ARIA, how we come about. We were founded about 21 years ago by 2 gentlemen, John Wong and Alan Akamoto. They have this vision, and they want to form this organization during the fact of Alan's father was a real estate agent, real estate broker. San Francisco Association would not allow him, would not welcome him as a member. So that's how they started the base. But with those 2 gentlemen's vision, of course, we now go to approximately 18,000 members and about 45 chapters throughout the United States and Canada. I remember back in the old days when they started it, and Alan Chang was the national president then. I sat on the national board. When you started anything, we don't have any money. So it's very hard, very difficult to move forward with anything we wanted to do. The first sponsor was Freddie Mac. Freddie Mac gave us money to start the seat. So a few years later, when I came aboard, and the problem is we run out of money. So when Alan Chiang was the president, together, him and I, we wrote a check for $15,000 for ARIA. Look what happened today. Those are the old days. Without all of us to participate, it's very difficult to have the organization like we're having today. And these two men, they just started out over a bowl of noodles. That's all they were saying. All we have was like $8 or $10. We don't have much money to start. So that's how they started like I said, they both of them is still very active in the state level as well as national level. As a matter of fact, John is chairing one of the committee, the major recognized, very, very prestigious committee. I believe the committee called the local housing diversity, whatever is a long name to it. And I'm also on one of his committee and able to work with these people again. And we just completed our Hill visit in Washington, D.C., 2024 ARIA Diversity and Fair Housing Summit from May 6th to May 8th, matter of fact. And this is a great experience to go to the Hill visit. We have the opportunity to meet with the elected official, the congressmen and women at the table to discuss with them what our needs and wants, and perhaps we're helping them along the way as well. And we brought along with our 3-point plan. And the plan that we delivered in DC was the land laws about foreigners, foreign ownership, financing solution, and appraisal equity. And all those are pretty common issue, not only the Asian community, but all community. This is very meaningful, very important visit at DC, and the experience can be fascinating if you have never been. And on May 13, which is just yesterday, the White House and the White House Initiative on Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander holds a historical event. And it really is an eye-opening. I wasn't there. I was told, I saw the tape, it was sent to me. And the landmark event was held in the nation's capital, commending 25 years since creation of the White House Initiative and the President Advisory Commission for AARP. And discuss where they've been, how they've been, and recognize the people, how they get there. And there's still a lot of more work to do. And, this is some 25 years later. And Bill, earlier, the speakers talk a little bit about NAR, and they celebrate their 50 years diversity as well, which is about 6 years already, 6 years ago. I was on that task force. We spent $1 million to promoting housing, fair housing initiative. So it is a critical issue, and it's not a sexy subject. A lot of these issues go to the wayside. But anyway, and that particular event at the White House, is the first time ever in history with the current and also the 5 past president formal leaders get to celebrate this particular event yesterday. And just like anything else, we still have a lot of work to do. Also, for 21 years that ARIA existed, for the very first time, we filed a fair housing discrimination lawsuit in a federal court in Miami challenging Florida, SB 264. SB 264 is prohibited ownership direct or indirectly to purchase, to buy, to own real estate, and especially to the foreigner. In this particular bill, some of the portion indicating specific to the Chinese restriction related to home ownership in any real estate in Florida. They started with the land. Last August 2023, Texas have passed a law also prohibited the foreigner to own land. They started with land. So a lot of restriction they were afraid might be coming possibly to the housing industry. So that's why the lawsuit is filed. It's going to take years to resolve, but we see what's going to happen. And this is the first time ARIA filed this particular lawsuit, and it's been thoroughly discussed and in the leadership level. And so it just filed, matter of fact, 2 weeks ago. So this is brand new on the agenda.
Thank you so much, Winnie. One of my questions was going to be what challenges are the organization face. And I'm glad that you talked on that bill because that was definitely on my radar as well. So thank you. Okay, we have the California Association of Black Real Estate Professionals, also known as CAB Rep. Representing CAB Rep is Realtor Emeritus, and I had to look that up. It means he's had his realtor license for at least 40 years. So thank you for that. He's asset manager Mel Wilson. Mel is a former NFL All-America football player and public speaker. He's a national subject matter expert in the fields of residential and commercial real estate, transit-oriented communities, leadership facilitator, legislative advocacy, workforce housing, land use policies, and please help me welcome Mel Wilson.
Well, good morning, all. I greet you on behalf of the California Association of Black Real Estate Professionals and our 2024 president, Robert Johnson. So let me just go over briefly our mission. We are a network of Black realtors, advancing them as business leaders in the industry and in our communities. We are advocates for increasing Black homeownership. We fully embrace our members by acknowledging, mentoring them, supporting them, and developing them into industry leaders both locally and nationally. So with that, let me just share with you a little bit about my journey. I was born in Alabama at a time when segregation in schools and all the public places was the law of the land. Moved to California when I was a young lad at the age of 10 years old with my grandmother, who was my mother and grandmother. She both raised me. And we came to California. And this is the first time that I've experienced integration, going to an integrated school in Mission Hills, California, which is in the San Fernando Valley. And so, you know, I would not have been able to talk to many of you back in Alabama back in those days. Some of you didn't even exist in Alabama. There were no Asians in Alabama back in those days. None. And when I came to California, I realized that as I became an adult, that the San Fernando Valley, the place where I've lived for the last 50 plus years, had a legacy of discrimination in housing. The community of Pacoima, which is where all people of color, whether you're Black, Latino, in that time, the only Asians were Japanese, had to live. And so it was a part of a plan that was actually executed by realtors, people who have licenses like we do. In fact, when I got my license in 1978, there were still covenant restrictions on some of the deeds that said colored, no one other than whites can live in these neighborhoods. And so things have changed. I'm going to challenge you and ask you the question, do you believe fair housing is truly fair today? No. Yeah, thank you, Winnie. And the other one is, what part of history are you making in your lives in making a difference in housing? I'll give you some startling facts. For example, today, there is a homeownership gap. That homeownership gap has existed for a number of years. Slavery ended in this country in 1865. 35 years later, the housing gap, homeownership gap for whites versus Blacks was 30 points. That's in the year 1900, 35 years after slavery. Fast forward, we've had the Fair Housing Act, right? You've heard of that, some of you, right? I think that was in 1968. We had the Civil Rights Act, 1964. And it took, an assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King to have the Fair Housing Act put in place. It's kind of crazy, but that is what's happened. And so with the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Humford Act, some of you may know about the Byron Humford Act. That was in the early 1960s, 1963. He was an African-American legislator in the state, and he got the governor to sign a bill that prohibited discrimination in housing. And guess what realtors did? In 1964, they got a bill, not a bill, but a Proposition 14. Look it up. Proposition 14, not 13, 14. And the realtors were behind this proposition that essentially said the Rutherford Act is illegal. Realtors got behind that bill, that proposition. Thank God, the Supreme Court in the state of California, the Supreme Court in the U.S. government, both decided and ruled that Prop 14 was illegal. And so now we have what is called fair housing. Fair housing for some, perhaps. In Pacoima, for example, where I grew up at, there is still a difference in the values of real estate for a typical 3-bedroom home. In Pacoima, you'll probably pay $750,000, $800,000 maybe today. But in an area that's just a few miles to the west and to the south, in Northridge, Granada Hills, Woodland Hills, areas like that, you're going to see a 15 to 20% difference in the price of a home today. And over the years, what has that done? That's caused a generational wealth gap. And that wealth gap has gotten wider and wider over time. So I challenge all of us as realtors to pay attention to what's going on. Most of my business for the last 40 plus years, 35% of have been with people who speak Spanish. Anybody speak Spanish? ¿Conoce a alguien que quieres comprar su casa? That was my door knocking pitch, okay? So all of that being said, let me tell you about a few challenges that we have at the California Association of Black Real Estate Professionals. It was a couple weeks ago, there was 5 bills that were introduced by some of the legislators who served on the reparations task force. Task force met for about a year and a half, and they came up with a number of things. Take a look at the task force findings. It's pretty exhaustive. But the bottom line was that there's 5 bills that were introduced, some of which were by Senators Stephen Bradford, some by Assemblymember Reginald Jones Sawyer. And those bills were trying to put back some of the fairness in housing, right? And so it came up for debate at the California Association of Realtors Board of Directors meeting. And I was not surprised, but I saw there was a probably more rancorous debate on those 5 bills than anything else. And we had the lawsuit, the litigation, the settlement, all that stuff was so important. But the debate was really about whether there should be a watch position taken by the California Association of Realtors or a support position taken by the California Association of Realtors on reparations. And I've heard so many different reasons why we should just watch it. We should just watch the legislature do it. We should not put any resources behind it. We should just watch. And fortunately, the members prevailed. There were a number of attempts to put it on a watch position, but overall, the board members decided that we were going to support these bills. So those are some of the challenges that we have today. We are trying to figure out how to get more homeownership. For example, if you are a renter today in California, your net worth is about $10,000. But if you're a homeowner, your net worth is about $400,000. A huge difference. If you are an African-American in the state of California today, there's about a 35% chance that you're going to own a home. But if you're white, there's a 65% chance you're going to own a home. If you're Latino, 45%. If you're Asian, 59%. So there's work yet to be done. I urge you to use your resources, use your passion to make things fair. And I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to Joelle. Joelle Peralta is representing the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. Thank you for being here. We like to call it NAREP. It's a purpose-driven organization propelled by a passionate combination of entrepreneurial spirit, cultural heritage, and member advocacy. Joelle Peralta, the Government Affairs Director for the San Fernando chapter of NAREP, he is a seasoned professional in the financial industry with over 10 years of experience. He has dedicated his career to empowering individuals and communities through accessible lending solutions. Joelle is also a community lending officer at Citibank. Please help me welcome Joelle.
Thank you guys for having us here. A very important topic, which is fair housing, and pretty tough to follow Mel after. Wow, I just want to keep on hearing him. 40 years of experience. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am Dominican descent, born and raised in New York City, been living 10 years here in California. Before that, I used to own a chain of Subway restaurants and run that in New York City before I sold it and moved over here. I had a buddy of mine that was in the housing industry over here, and he told me about the impact here in California on how the real estate market was flourishing, and I delved into it. It's very important to me to be a lender, especially, right? Because I could share a little story with you guys about how the Hispanic community in the U.S. has grown substantially, and it's only growing. So I feel like that's the market where most people should attend to. My parents were entrepreneurs. They moved from the Dominican Republic over here with, a third grade background and a fifth grade background. In our country, this education wasn't priority because they had to work. However, they had the opportunity to come to this country, the promised land, right, to work and flourish. And my parents opened up a small little beauty salon and grew it to multiple locations, and were able to purchase their first home in the year 2000, which is the American dream, right? However, though, they needed to reinvest into their business, and they refinanced their home to pull out some money to continue growing it. However, I was their point of contact, right? The Latino community, it's all family. So I am their voice. I am the one that talks for them. I'm 10 years old, 11, 12, and I am their advocate. I'm their lawyer. I'm their everything. Mel should know because he's worked in that community, right? It hurts me to say that when I sat there with the loan officer and my parents as they were doing this transaction, they entered into predatory lending. So they got to pick a payment plan. I don't know if you guys remember that. That's back in the days of World Savings Bank. So my parents worked and worked and worked, and for 20 years, they paid and put money into their home to then realize that all they were paying was interest for 20 years. And eventually they lost their house. That was their nest egg. So that's why I'm a proponent, and I joined this organization because, again, homeownership is a symbol of the American dream, right? The cornerstone of wealth and a stabilizing force for the working family. So here at NARAP, our role as trusted advisors and passionate advocates is to help more Hispanic families achieve the American dream in a sustainable way that empowers them for generations to come. NARAP has a network of 40,000 members, real estate professionals. We have 100 local chapters nationwide, and Latinos account for 70% of home ownership growth over the next 20 years. It's been 50% since the year 2000. Look, in the year 2000, there was 4.2 million Hispanic homeowners. And in the year 2023, there's 9.5 million. That's a 49.5% growth. So this demographic is only going to keep on growing. And we're here as an organization to help them and help the Latino professional as well, help the community. And it's not just Latinos in NARAP. We have from all different walks of life, different ethnicities. However, though, it's a demographic that deserves attention right now. And Mel knows. She worked with most of the Latinos. What challenges are we having? Like everybody else, our challenges is the record low housing supply, right? That remains number one barrier in the Latino home growth. We have 8.3 million Latinos aged 45 and under who are currently mortgage ready, but can't buy a home, right? The entry barrier it's really difficult. So what NARAP has done is we go lobby. I'm the government affairs director. We go lobby at Washington to make sure that we can change the programs, right? The entry programs. That's why I'm a community lender. Like I explained that story. I have a passion for helping my Latino community to be able to go into purchasing a home, because that's where we create wealth, like Mel said as well. That's the wealth creating environment that we're at. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joelle. Please help me welcome our next speaker by Zoom, Stephen Beard. He's an accessibility specialist realtor, disability advocate, podcaster, and speaker based in the San Francisco Bay Area. His work focuses on helping people who are differently abled to buy and sell accessible housing, as well as promoting accessible housing in the community. To that end, Stephen launched a podcast about accessible housing called Accessible Housing Matters in 2021. In addition to working with clients, Stephen speaks to real estate agents, disability advocates, and policymakers all over the country about accessible and fair housing issues. Thank you. Please help me welcome Stephen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate and allowing me to participate remotely. I'm just excited to be in the room with you in this virtual way with such esteemed colleagues and such passionate advocates for fair housing. I've been selling real estate for 20 years. I got into real estate to serve people who are differently abled. And it has been both exhilarating and challenging. And I think that from a fair housing perspective, one of the biggest challenges that we face as realtors is how to overcome our own implicit, unconscious bias and impressions that we bring to the table in how we serve clients who are different than ourselves, who appear either mobility challenged or cognitively challenged. There is some great material on this. They were talking before the previous speaker about the Fairhaven simulator, which is a great tool for getting at some of the ways that we might be making assumptions without even knowing we're making assumptions. A simple area where I like to talk about when I talk to groups like this is when we meet someone who is perhaps using a wheelchair, what comes to mind about them that might color the way we do a consultation if they're a buyer? Do we make a presumption, for example, that they are only going to be interested in ranch style, single level, zero threshold properties? Do we make an assumption about how easy they're going to be for us to work with? Do we make assumptions about how much money they have or whether they can self-represent themselves? So that's just like opening ideas around this. I am passionate about helping real estate agents all over the country to think about clients who are different and come across differently than themselves, physically or cognitively, with an open spirit of curiosity and questioning. And to that end, I'm very proud to be a co-chair of the California Association of Realtors Differently Abled Affinity Group. We have our quarterly meeting coming up, I think, next week. And one of the things that we've been working on that group, in addition to education and resources, is creating a standard for the California Association of Realtors around MLS descriptors around access issues. And that's a lot more complicated than it might at first seem to be. First of all, not all the MLSs are controlled by any kind of single entity. There's a lot of different MLSs that are controlled by different entities, some of whom participate more actively than others in these types of forums. And the bottom line is that accessibility depends on the individual's needs. And two people who use a wheelchair, for example, may have completely different needs in their home search. And so trying to create parameters that will be both helpful for listing agents and for buyers to use is challenging because there's so many variables. You can really get into the weeds quite quickly. Like, for example, it's not easy, it's not good enough to simply say it has a ramp. Where is the ramped access? How does it serve the property access? An accessible bathroom is a meaningless term. We need to talk about what makes the bathroom accessible for what type of need, right? So anyway, that's just sort of like an overview of where I am and what I do. And I completely agree with the previous speakers. Despite the fair housing laws that have been in place, and despite that all of us represent groups that are considered protected classes, we have a lot of way to go, especially in the area of sort of this sort of unconscious, I didn't realize I shouldn't be asking that question, or I didn't realize I shouldn't be making those assumptions kinds of biases. And I encourage everyone to look at the Harvard implicit bias test. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but there's a really cool, easy to run implicit bias test that you can do on your phone to help see if you yourself display bias that you're not even aware of in regards to a wide variety of interests and things that we might have opinions on. It's a really cool sort of self-assessment. And I think that that's something that we, all four of us, want to help overcome. And I'm so glad that I get to be here today to help this room anyway start thinking about things broadly. So I want to add a couple of points to all these great suggestions. The first one is curiosity. We must come from a place of wonderment and curiosity and excitement when we're meeting with clients who appear and come across different than ourselves. And when I say curiosity, I mean to ask them questions that are about what they need without making any assumptions about it, and engage them where they're at. And that's hard. But I think that that's got to be a fundamental principle that will allow us to serve, along with the other ideas that came up around, treat everyone exactly the same way and all that stuff. But asking questions is always a really good idea. Authentic, interested questions, I think, are a really important first step in treating people the way we would want to be treated ourselves, or the way they would like to be treated by a profession such as ourselves. But the other thing I want to touch on is this idea of advocacy. I believe really strongly that advocacy isn't just, lobbying by our representatives at CAR or NAR and pushing for fair, more affordable housing and all that good stuff. It also comes down to, right inside a transaction, avoiding the temptations to do what's expedient. So let me give you an example. You have a buyer who is differently abled, and they maybe a wheelchair user, and they come across a property they really like in all respects, but the condo has an accessibility challenge to it. Perhaps there's a threshold step in the common area. And your buyer really likes it, and the HOA, you inquire with the listing agent, and the HOA says, they find out that the HOA says, no, we can't accommodate you putting in a ramp, which is a clear ADA, fair housing violation, right? But the market's really moving quickly, and there's, other properties out there, and the fight might take a long time, blah, blah, blah. We have a fiduciary obligation to advocate for our clients and to make sure they know that they can take action against such flagrant violations, which happen all the time. It's flagrant, but it's not unusual. So I think our personal advocacy, where we have reason to suspect that there's a fair housing violation happening, is absolutely critical, not to take the easy path and say, let's just go look at other properties.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and all of you.
you.